Okay, never mind, it's back now.
In the last episode we talked about the plan that China and Russia have to end the dollar. I explained how China developed its own economic weapon against the USA, which intends to replace the SWIFT system and with which Russia plans to bypass the sanctions for the invasion to Ukraine, the crypto yuan. I also told you about how the United States and its European allies respond with sanctions against Russia, and this situation put not only Europe, but also our country, in a vulnerable position. This is where the question arises, how the USA will face the effects that these sanctions will cause on its allies and on itself, with an economy already weakened by the pandemic and an inflation not seen in more than 40 years that ties its hands to print more money. But precisely weeks after Russia invades Ukraine, on March 9th, President Biden signed an executive order, directing various federal agencies to assess the impact of cryptocurrencies on financial stability and national security, while asks them to explore the possibility of creating a cryptocurrency issued by the Federal Reserve, that is, a crypto dollar. Even, according to the San Diego Tribune, government sources have indicated that the executive order was being prepared months before the invasion of Ukraine. But what does it mean that the United States government decided to issue its own cryptocurrency, and how would it help stop the advance of China and the crypto yuan, as well as the loss of prominence of the dollar? For those who know the world of cryptocurrencies, you have surely heard the term fractional reserve several times. The fractional reserve system is the system with which most banks operate today. Through this system, the central bank, which in the case of the USA is the Federal Reserve, requires commercial banks to maintain a certain amount of money in the accounts that these banks keep in central banks. In this way, banks cannot lend all the deposits they receive from their clients, but rather are obliged to keep at least a fraction of them. The lower the reserve percentage required by the central banks, the greater the capacity of the banks to create or print new money, since the credits granted with the money from the deposits, when deposited again in bank accounts, return to form part of the reserves, enabling the bank to lend money again. This effect is called the bank multiplier, but most people only know it as printing money. As you can imagine, the lower the percentage of reserves maintained by the banks, the greater the risk of bankruptcy or non-payment is assumed by the banking system, since if in a certain situation, savers present themselves to withdraw their money in cash, the banks would not be able to deliver such deposits and therefore would have to declare bankruptcy, affecting the entire world financial system. On the other hand, the government is the main promoter of keeping this reserve ratio, called the reserve ratio, low, since it can thus print more money and continue financing its current spending or paying debts with more debts. It's like a real juggling game, where the slightest mistake can bring everything down. On the other hand, the cash coefficient is only one piece in this money printing game, since as I told you, it also influences the fact that the new printed money is again deposited in bank accounts in order to print more money. The faster this money is deposited, relent, and redeposited, the more money is printed and enters the economy. This is called the velocity of money. Now you know how the government runs this money printing game, but what does central bank CBDC cryptocurrencies like the crypto yuan or the crypto dollar have to do with it? In order to explain, we will go back to the 1930s. In 1933, the United States was experiencing the effects of the Great Depression, which since 1929 had suffered from the effects of prolonged deflation and high unemployment, the causes of which many attributed to the errors of the Federal Reserve and its policy of restricting the money supply. On March 4, 1933, Franklin Roosevelt took office with a concrete recovery plan called the New Deal. The New Deal consisted of a series of banking reforms, but above all investment in infrastructure, to bring the United States to the economic levels prior to the Depression. Huge infrastructure projects would be carried out with the New Deal, such as the interstate highway system. Obviously, all those investment projects did not finance themselves. The government needed a way to be able to print more money to carry them out. However, because at that time the dollar was backed by gold, it was limited by the gold reserves that banks had deposits in the Federal Reserve. Given these limitations, the government had to devise a way to be able to print more money. Thus, on April 5, 1933, just 1 month after assuming the presidency, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102, forcing U.S. citizens to deposit the physical gold they had in their possession in the Federal Reserve, in exchange for certificates of deposit that protected those deposits. This, although, in practice, an expropriation of the communist countries, allowed the government to print more money to finance its projects. Nearly 100 years later, the dollar is no longer backed by gold, so the US government is no longer constrained by its gold reserves, so if it wants to print more dollars it has several options: lower the reserve ratio, increase its reserves of dollars, or increase the velocity of money. We are going to analyze each of the three. Let's start by reducing the cash ratio. As we have already seen, reducing the cash ratio implies serious risks for the financial and monetary system that could lead to a situation similar to or worse than that of 1929, since it would increase the risk of bank failure, and a default by a large or medium-sized bank could generate a domino effect on the other banks and actors in the financial system. Increasing the dollar reserves is a solution that seems viable. As we have seen, it was successfully achieved when it confiscated the gold of the citizens. Only a similar order would be enough to confiscate or prohibit the cash, so that instead of having the citizens, this monetary mass outside the system will be part of the reserves of the Federal Reserve. Well, this could be done very simply by introducing a cryptocurrency like the crypto dollar. There are those who could say that cash is hardly used in America and therefore this measure to increase reserves would be ineffective. Although this is partially true, it could also be deduced that the cash circulating within the USA would not be the main objective for increased reserves. It would be more effective to capture the savings of citizens of other countries that already operate with high cash rates and informal economy, as is the case of several countries in Latin America or Africa. The citizens of these countries, who are also affected by the devaluation of their currencies, would find it very attractive to operate or trade directly using the US cryptocurrency. This would have a serious impact on their own countries by further devaluing their currencies in favor of the dollar. The third option would also be something that the government could implement directly in a possible crypto dollar. It could increase the velocity of the money by forcing us to spend it, implementing in the algorithm a function with which the money would lose value or expire if it was not spent. This would make people consume more and entrepreneurs decide to make more investments through borrowed money and thus increase the money supply. As you can see, the United States, or better said, its currency, the dollar, is not completely lost. They can still resort to the creation of a crypto dollar, and thus, at least limit the advance of China and its crypto yuan, at the expense of course of the freedom of its own citizens and the depreciation of the currencies of other countries. If you want to know more about how cryptocurrencies will change capitalism as you know it, and how you can be part of that change, I invite you to take my free crypto marketing course. Just click on the link in the comments, and of course, don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you can keep learning more about blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies and tokenization.